Yeah, let's. I want to talk about these pants,
My magic pants.
your magic pants that you got.
I just like I've done a little yoga. I kind of understand just that black and green one. I gave my brother the other two for his softball team.
Oh, okay.
Let him use them. I've done yoga, but I did it in like basketball shorts, like just normal, typical stuff that I would have around the house. I got these yoga pants on vacation, and they've kind of changed my life.
Where are they from?
Nike. We got them at one of the Nike stores when we were.
Were they in
on
like the
coast.
yoga pant section? Because I've seen those at Dick's, and they actually felt really comfortable.
Yeah, they had like a little Nike yoga section. And obviously, I'm not going for like the tank tops or anything like that. But as soon as I felt these pants, I had to have them. They were like $40.
Okay, this is gonna lead right into something I was thinking about this morning. I was doing laundry this morning, and I was like putting away my sweatpants, and then I would fold up like Katie's like pajama pants, and I was like, they don't make men's like pajama pants or anything out of the material that they make a lot of women's stuff, and the women's stuff is like super comfy, and I think it's the same type of material they make like
Yeah.
the yoga pants, like it's light and it's stretchy, and I'm like, this feels fantastic. And that had me thinking, like, I've seen a lot of stuff and I guess it's because they do say women buy more clothing. I don't know how accurate that is now. I think that might be something that was just like a time before. That's like an old stereotype from like years ago. Because I'm telling you right now that, like, yeah, I do think they probably buy a little bit more clothing and stuff like that, but men are very close behind.
Yeah, and I don't know if I'm a good case study for it because I just am very impulsive. So if I see something I like, I usually buy it. I would say that I probably buy more clothes just because they're just there. And as soon as I see it, it's like, yes, that's my size. I do think that they don't make as many men's clothes out of that same material, external genitalia. Because if I wore these without underwear, I'd have like 5 minutes before I just Spider-Man the inside of them. They're just so soft. It's like a velvet bag full of puppy ears.
Well, that's why I like wearing these shorts that have the liners in them.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, you know, it doesn't ride up. There's no like, that's why they're so nice. I think like Bird Dogs makes them. I'm wearing Lulu's. I think that Athleta makes them. I'm sure like I've seen it like a lot of people advertising. That's the big thing is the liners inside. Mm-hmm. Do you remember
So you don't
when
have
you
to
used to
wear
just have
underwear.
that fucking net briefs
The mesh.
inside? Swimsuits, so fucking uncomfortable. Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk about, they do look really comfortable.
They're so nice. They're so
I was
stretchy.
going to say, don't get too relaxed.
I can almost kick above my head in them, which, I mean, without pants, I still can't, but it allows me that range of motion.
It almost allows you a nude range of motion.
Exactly, yeah. If I could do a backflip, I could definitely do a backflip in these.
So this is our plea, actually, to all manufacturers of men's clothing. Start taking samples from the women's design side. Stuff feels good.
Yeah, we like to be pampered, too.
All right, here's the other thing I was thinking about. I have a. It's not really a PSA. It's a plead, is what it is. Out to Big Microwave, all the microwave manufacturers. At this point, we just need to know what popcorn you guys are using when you test your preset popcorn times. Just tell us the manufacturer. I don't care if it's not even a popcorn that I like or like, you know, you probably have your Pop Secret people, your Orville Redenbacher people. You might have your Jolly Time people or whatever. Listen, just tell us what you use to test it with, and we'll switch our popcorns to whatever that is. Because I'm sick of either leaving too many seeds in the bag.
Too many kernels.
Or I'm tired of what's even worse on the other side is when you burn like 5 pieces. So they're hidden in there. And you're just eating pieces, and then all of a sudden you get that fucking burnt piece because you're not looking down to see what you're eating.
And you can smell them, too.
But you don't know where they're at.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to search through the whole thing.
It's like a dog turd landmine in your popcorn.
Yes, and then you eat it, and you bite into that just burnt-ass popcorn, and then it just fucking ruins the next 30 seconds, and you're trying to get the taste out of your mouth with fucking whatever you're drinking. Just tell us what brand you're using. Put it on a little tag inside the microwave. Just say Pop Secret or fucking Orville Redenbacher or something like that. And buy that.
There's a lot of things about microwaves that I don't think normal people know. Or maybe it's just because I don't really, like, we don't use ours very much. I very sparingly for tortillas and stuff like that to make them softer. But there's different power voltages that you can set your microwave at? Like there's a
Yeah, like
low,
most are
medium, and
1,000
high.
watt, but then I don't know if like is it power 1 through 10 is 100 each. I'm sure this is all in a microwaves user's manual, but I don't know who other than the first time someone ever bought a microwave or brought one home. I don't know if anyone has ever read the manual about it. Like, it has the instructions on the inside. Like, you open it, it's like, for this many ounces, it's defrost, weight, or time. I honestly, within the last 5 years of my life, have only discovered those features. The defrost, weight, and time, the soften, all that kind of stuff when I'm, melting butter, doing something like that. But just think about it. When you're younger, all you're really worried about is maybe the popcorn button. You know how long it's going to take to heat up your burritos or whatever. That 30-second plus button on the start, that's like your best friend.
Yeah,
Minute 30,
absolutely.
boom, boom, boom. Heat up something. But
I don't know what it is about microwaves. They don't really give me the desired texture that I want and stuff. But I remember
I feel like you see, as someone who like really enjoys cooking and kind of like almost the process of it, I think a microwave looks like not at like I think look at microwaves like they're trashy.
no,
Like, look at this goddamn lazy box for these people that can't fucking get a saucepan out and heat something up on the stove the right way, or
they serve their purpose. They do what they need to do. I just don't like have a lot of uses for them. Like you
Yeah.
talking about popcorn, it would almost feel like it would be easier for me just to get a skillet out and pour the kernels in and just
that sends a goddamn nightmare to
do
me.
it over the heat. Why? Because you can season it at the same time. Like you can put your butter in there and you can toss it around in the pan first.
It takes me 2 minutes, 20 seconds to make this popcorn you just described, just in those small steps right there, like a 10 to 15 minute endeavor.
But mine doesn't burn because I can see what's going on.
Honestly, man, I'll take the 5 burnt pieces in my mouth to save that extra 10 minutes at night to go watch something. See, you're a purist.
Yeah, and there's like
I'm trash apparently.
good food isn't fast and fast food isn't good. Like there's some fast food that's great. Don't get me wrong. I've been known to attack a Del Taco every now and then. Or like as much as I don't like Jimmy John as a man, Jimmy John's Italian sandwiches aren't that bad. Like if you can get the right order, it's a pretty good deal.
Their jalapeno chips are so good.
They
have
are.
the best jalapeno chips that anybody makes, and the fact that you have to go just there. I don't know why companies like that don't actually just sell their chips in larger bags in the store. Is it because they want you to come there so you have to like buy a sandwich at the same time? You feel
Well, and you're buying $1 a bag for like 6 ounces of chips, whereas
they're pretty good about putting chips in. Like those kettle ones seem to go together in a bag. They don't skimp on their chips. That's one thing that I'm very impressed with Jimmy John's.
probably not. You don't need as much air to protect them because they are smaller, lighter bags. But that's the one sandwich that I do where I still have to put chips in it. Like as a little kid,
Oh, really?
always have to bury my barbecue chips in the Italian sandwich.
Really?
I love the crunch. It's just a good feeling.
Yeah. I never thought about doing that.
Plus the jalapeno chips. They were at a barbecues the other day, and I had to slide some jalapenos in there. Great experience.
I literally went through the drive-through 3 days ago just to get jalapeno chips, and I pull up to the drive-through and I look over and there's a sign taped across it that says we're out of jalapeno chips. The one thing they're out of, and so the guy's like, "Can I help you?" I was like, "Yeah, can I just get a fucking bag of regular chips, a fucking pickle quartered, drown my sorrows." I even asked him. I didn't even notice the paper. I just go, "Jalapeno chips, please." And he goes, "Ooh, unfortunately, we're out." I looked at the paper. And I was like, "God damn it!"
There's always that little feeling when you read it, and it's exactly what you want. Like there could be a sign up for anything, and whatever you want that day, that sign.
That's
it's
what
like
it's gonna
9
be.
times out of 10.
The
it's
one
gonna be
time
bad.
that you want to try tuna at Subway or some shit, guys, we're out of tuna today. Well, this is probably a sign, actually.
Yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. It's Subway. Subway is another one of those places where I don't. It's like the microwave of sandwiches for me. Mm-hmm. It's good in a pinch. It serves its purpose. It feeds people. Do they still do $5 footlongs, or was that kind of nixed after Jared's debacle?
I don't think they do $5 foot long. I would think with inflation that wouldn't be viable for them anymore.
Probably, but they.
Maybe it's like a nine for $5. Like you get 9 inches now for $5.
Yeah. They don't cut down on the price. They just cut down on the size of the sandwich.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I say, they serve a purpose. It's just not great. I do like their marketing campaign, though. The fact that they decided to spend a bunch of money on like Steph Curry and Serena Williams and Charles Barkley to do their advertising instead of like spending the money on
they
their
probably
food.
really want to go after people that have a lot of already background information on them. Be like, we need to make sure that none of these guys are diddling kids. People that have already been vetted, like thoroughly vetted. Like Steph Curry's been in the limelight for so long. They know he's clean.
He's great with kids.
Yeah, Serena, she's clean.
Yep. Chuck, while not clean on the outer edges of the surfaces,
But when he did all his dirty shit before social media, so it's only hearsay technically.
Except for the DUI. The DUI might be like one of the... Did you ever hear about him getting arrested for the DUI down in Phoenix?
No.
So they have it on tape of a recording of him telling the guy that if he lets him off the DUI, he will get the guy's name tattooed on his ass. But the way that he said it is like, I'll get my name tattooed on your ass. Or, no. I'll get my name tattooed on... No. He just keeps going on and on.
Listen,
and on. It's
you
like,
can stick your head up a butcher's ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same idea. But you could tell, like, at that point, all you had to do was hear the one audio clip and be like, yeah, that's a DUI. He was drunk.
The guy that played Shooter McGavin just get a DUI recently?
Did he?
I thought I just saw that. He has a DUI, but I don't know if it just was a story coming back around or if that was a new story.
What level of fame would you have to achieve to try to get out of a DUI using that?
Any. If someone has... You think that like a local weather person doesn't get pulled over and is just like, hey, it's me.
Do you watch Channel 6?
Yeah.
Does his face look familiar?
Yeah.
Maybe if I do some hand motions, maybe if I point towards the low pressure system, does that ring any bells?
I was going to say, remember me, high pressure system up here? The one that told you it was going to be sunny today?
That would be tough, though, to be like, I know you're going to arrest me for this DUI. Are you, by any chance, a Happy Gilmore fan? Do I look familiar?
I know, that's, I think, exactly what it said.
Really?
Yes.
He actually tried to pull the shooter card?
He tried to pull the shooter card.
I give him respect for trying it. Famous people DUI videos are very funny.
Yes.
That's
what they should do instead of like, the People magazine. Hey, they're just like us. That's the thing that's even more relatable. It's not that the fact that they shop for groceries. Of course they fucking shop for groceries. They need to eat. The fact is that they fuck up like normal people. It's just like, that's much more relatable.
I don't care about them going and shopping.
She's eating kale. I don't eat kale or anything. But like, oh yeah, I fucked up before. Hey, I get that.
I've been on a police recording before, just like they do.
You know what this actually makes me think of? These laws that you're talking about with these, DUIs and things like that. I'm having a brain fart for a second where I was going with this.
What are we getting at?
No, okay. So what we were getting at is, I was trying to think of how to say it. This place actually had the one of the first recorded, if not the first recorded instance where it was a civilization where there were like publicly set laws that were like set into stone and placed all over the city so people knew what their rights were and what the laws were.
This is a funny one to think about too. Or we're talking about like maybe Babylon?
We are talking about Babylon.
And maybe the Hanging Gardens?
And the Hanging Gardens.
I like this.
And there's a tower in there.
I believe the first guy that really made Babylon happen was Hammurabi, right?
Yes, and every time they said Hammurabi, I kept thinking of Harambe.
Harambe, the poor gorilla?
Harambe, the poor gorilla. But Hammurabi, is it Hammurabi?
I just go with
I think that's
Hammurabi because it sounds close enough.
So yeah, founder of the old Babylonian Empire.
Could you imagine getting a DUI and Hammurabi's code was still there and like you got arrested for driving drunk, so your punishment was to have to drive drunk with a drunk policeman back to jail?
Like, to show him that you're not drunk?
Just like, since
Like,
Hammurabi was like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Yeah.
Like, if you got caught doing during a DUI, you had to be driven by a drunk person, like back to being back to jail.
I gotcha. Okay.
I don't mind it as much because I do think that if you live by Hammurabi's code and like you molest somebody or rape somebody, if you get raped back, I feel like that's sort of...
Was it basically an eye for an eye system?
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, yeah. So if you wrong somebody, if you rob them, then you would get robbed back. If you broke somebody's hand... By that same
person, or did they like find someone, they're like, no, we got people on like retainer that will do the robbing.
That I don't know.
They're vetted.
Like if they had robbers that they just employed to rob people back.
Yeah, like be expecting our people within the next 2 to 3 days.
Sleep tight.
Mm-hmm. The waiting is half the punishment. No, so Babylon, I mean, I think one of the things with Babylon too is because it is mentioned in the Bible, but it's also historical. It's one of those things where like, well, was it real? Did it exist? Or, because I guess that would be with your mindset being that like a lot of stuff in the Bible is fictional, which
it is.
It is.
You can't turn water into wine. I don't care if you're David Blaine or Jesus Christ.
There wasn't a big boat with dinosaurs on it.
No, you can't.
Along with every other animal that still exists on Earth.
Yeah, how do they get there? This wasn't Pangea where they could just walk across the...
But I think that's kind of something to be said, is if something's in there, it's like Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, have they ever located the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, or were they just like, because they were supposed to be wiped out, right?
They were turned into pillars of salt.
Okay. So with Babylon is a completely completely non-fictional, completely real city and civilization. So it was the city of Babylon, which was inside Babylonia, which was part of the Macedonian Empire.
It was in Macedonia.
In Macedonia, correct. Okay.
But yeah, it sprung up in modern day Iraq right now. So you can imagine the landscape of just being in the desert, very hard place to inhabit. But under Hammurabi, when it really got going around the 19th century BC, which was so long ago, the fact that we have some sort of written record of it, and the
fact that we're already past the opposite end. We already went from 19th century BC back to 0. Mm-hmm. Then we're past 19. That's how long ago this shit was.
Just forever. And I don't know if there's certain kinds of... I'm having trouble gathering all this, but these cradles of civilization that have happened all around the world, and we talked about one being...
the Aztecs.
The Incans.
South America. Incans in South America, yeah.
And they were around the Fertile Crescent in Macedonia where this other cradle of civilization happened, but these people had a written history so much sooner than the people in the Incan Empire. I mean, the Incan Empire never had The
Incan Empire, remember we talked about this? The fact that it was so close. It was about the time where Europe was going through like the Renaissance.
Mm-hmm. And
this was so much longer.
Yeah, if that was 1400s AD... Mm-hmm. Then this is almost 3,400 years the opposite direction.
Don't make me do math right now. Sure,
it's just so long ago, and the fact that they did have this system. I mean, it lends credence to the Bible being more real, just because this is something that transcended the Bible, and we do have histories of them.
Good fiction does have to have elements of reality in order to go ahead and make it more believable.
Absolutely.
If you're trying not to make it be fiction, you're trying to make fiction be believable, you have to have elements of reality in it.
And truth that did happen. Hammurabi was a real person. Mm-hmm. He was a real king. When he founded kind of the old Babylonian Empire, it turned into one of the biggest, most powerful cities in Macedonia. It was a city of trade. There was a lot of diversity that would come in, and that was sort of towards the later years, kind of where we're going to be talking about with the Hanging Gardens, where they were going out and warring with other areas. Mm-hmm. and they would be bringing people back into Babylon, so there would be a higher population of people that spoke different languages. It was just kind of a cultural hub at that point.
Well, at one point it was the largest city in the world.
Really?
And I think it hit about 200. And I know this doesn't sound that large, but it was 200,000 people. So I grew up in like a town with like 7,000 people, and where we are isn't it about 235,000?
I think the city that we're in now the valley is almost 1 million, but the valley is so big and encompasses so many cities.
But still, we see how stretched out we are in this area.
Absolutely.
200,000 people. So, I mean, that's nothing to scoff at. 200,000 people, especially back, in that day.
Well, and when you didn't have like suburbs, you didn't have transportation to bring you to and from places.
No.
So you had to live close to the city to be a part of the city.
And this was also Babylon was a fortified city with walls. Mm-hmm. And like defensively. So the layout of Babylonia, how many people do you think actually know that Babylonia or Babylon is in modern day Iraq?
I knew that it was over there. I didn't realize that I think it's like 50 miles away from Baghdad.
Like south of Baghdad?
It's just that close to an area that's been in contention for so many years. And excuse me, thinking back on it, didn't really kind of like the borders of like Iraq and Afghanistan and everything, they didn't really come to be until we were splitting up all of Germany's assets after World War One, right?
Yeah, there was the creation of some areas down there in the Middle East that did end up getting. It was people, I think some of like, don't quote me on this, but the people that ended up becoming like the royal families in those areas, I want to say they had to have probably sided with the Allies to some degree to be able to then stay in power in those areas. But there probably was, even if it wasn't as a result of like World War One, where they were deciding what to do with like portions of Europe to break up. Mm-hmm. Those countries could have used that time and that confusion as a power grab to define their own borders for people to take power. And then after kind of the dust settled, they were like, yeah, we're not going to go haggle with these guys about their borders. We just got done with the World War. You guys are good. We
may be splitting Afghanistan and Iraq on borders, but this is still our area.
This is pretty, this isn't like on
Central.
Like close to the border. This is like right in the middle of Iraq, just south of Baghdad. But the fact that this is there is just kind of like weird, because if Iraq has been so much in, your face at different points. Yeah, at different points within the last like 40 years during like Desert Storm, and then what they call the new Operation Iraqi Freedom and all that kind of stuff, that you kind of forget that these areas are like part of the cradle of civilization, where some of the oldest and longest standing civilizations were born out of. One of the things, did you know that the Babylonians, they were the ones that invented like the written record?
Was it cuneiform?
I can't remember how they said. Is cuneiform the one where they take the reeds and it's all about like wedged angles and everything like that?
No, cuneiform is it might have started from that, but it's the cuts and the different like textures on the rocks.
I want to say this one they were talking about was made with reeds, and it was like wedged angles. It might be cuneiform.
It could be.
We might be talking about the same thing. But as a civilization, they were kind of trying to... they were talking to a professor, and they were asking, what's the biggest contribution, that we can feel from the Babylonian Empire, Babylon today? And they're like, writing, like written accounts. That's not just saying written history. That's saying writing down stories, poems, songs, like all of that kind of stuff. Like the idea came from here. Like, I don't know and I know we haven't discussed a whole slew of like civilizations and everything like that, but that seems like that's a pretty big feather in your cap if that's accurate.
Oh, absolutely. There's different kind of forms of evolution, I would think, as far as like how we do things. And
well, like some civilization at one point, I'm trying to think, someone gave us the steam engine. and then someone gave us one civilization gave us, how to make textiles or something like that. So I mean, there's been contributions from different civilizations, but
I don't think anything that's blended into so many, like, you have to be to a certain point in evolution as a people to start writing things down and start creating a record.
Do you realize that they created the thing that was then used in the Bible to then shit talk them?
Yeah, bad. Definitely not the right
Like we're taking
use of it.
Yeah, we're going to take what you created and we're going to use it to tell everyone that your city wasn't this great empire, that you were basically just a bunch of fucking heathens and buttfuckers.
And that's what I kind of like about it. I'm not a big fan of religion and necessarily the Bible, just because I do believe that it is a collection of stories, and if you read it as a collection of stories, probably a great book. But when you start assigning significance to it as like something that was happening was real, just 100% wholeheartedly, is when it becomes an issue. But just the Bible alone is just like a fiction writing is really truly great, because you get some of the best stories. You get, whereas we would see, like, we did Homeric poems, and we talked about how they were kind of written around the time the Bible was. Before that, you had the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written down, I believe, somewhere in Macedonia. But you get the idea of those being kind of religion back then to the Bible somehow being the one that's still being held up in high regard. And I don't know when the Quran was written. I'm assuming the Torah was probably written before the Bible, just because the Old Testament in the Bible was Jewish, so the Torah would have had to have come right around then. But if we had just left it as a book like the Epic or like what Homer had done, I think it would have been fine. It was when we started giving more credit to the stories as more real that it kind of became more dangerous.
And even if it was admitted to be stories or, not completely true, I think it would still have a following. It wouldn't be what it would be today. But even when you look at stuff that's like newer actual fiction, it's weird to say, but like the way that some people treat those books or the lore, or that really enjoy them, it's like a form of religion. It's just you don't have like a central or like deity that you're religious about the lore and the story, not about like the deity.
You take different parts of what it's about, kind of, to...
Well, like you look at writings that look at Lord of the Rings. Some people are really, really into Lord of the Rings, and there's enough story there and enough stories and lore that like you can really get deep into that. Look at some like Star Wars collectors and everything. That could be almost their type of religion. There even is a religion within Star Wars that like has become a religion.
Are you fucking with me right now?
No, there's an actual Jedi religion.
What?
There's a Jedi religion, yeah. Look it up.
I get that, though, and I think, like, what you're talking about kind of made me think about it, but there's redeeming qualities in all these stories that you look at and think, okay, this is a good example of somebody who is heroic because they felt like the humility to be able to do something extraordinary, or the sacrifice that they gave to protect other people. And you can draw good parallels. And again, the Bible is full of good parallels, and we'll talk about some of them. Stuff that I had forgotten, that I had known just through so many years of church, that you hear these little stories, and a lot of the stories that I remember are from like being a kid. Because you're told a certain amount of stories, like we'll get into Daniel and the Lion's Den, we'll get into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those were stories of faith that you wanted to instill in children, because the more times that you talked about faith, the more chance that they would have to learn what faith is and to try to get faith in your...
Yeah, it sounds like you're trying to use exciting stories like that to buy yourself more time to get them to listen to the other stuff.
Which is, I mean, we were around for Bo Jackson's time, but to hear things after that we didn't necessarily get to see, it kind of makes them larger than life. Like when you hear about like Bill Russell, we weren't around to really see Bill Russell. The man had all these different rings. Man, he was a 10-time champion, and just with him passing, I never knew that he was the first black coach for the Celtics. And I want to say that he might have been the first black coach in the NBA, but just the lure about them makes them larger than life figures. And when you look back on it, Bill Russell really was larger than life. The guy was a part of the civil rights movement and all that kind of stuff. We never got to see him play. We never got to see the bulk of his work. We can see highlights now, but the stories always make them bigger. And the more you remove yourself from them, like Daniel, like Goliath, and who's the little fella that fought Goliath?
David.
David, that's right. Yeah, King David and all that happened after that, he becomes a larger-than-life figure that you can look at and say, this guy was legit. Mm-hmm. We just can't see that he ever fought a giant. We just have to go by the stories that were told so long ago.
And kind of getting back into Babylon, how that relates back to, you had the Bible specifically addressing legitimate rulers, like real rulers of Babylon, but then turning them into something that they weren't, using them almost like as the villains of the story.
Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible was not a good person.
No.
He was somebody that took over a lot of area, and part of the reason why was because Nebuchadnezzar was soaking up all these villages around Babylon that was where most of this writing came from. So just like we talked about with the Vikings, just like we talked about with the Incans, when people are called savages, they're called savages from the mindset of the people that are being taken over by them, not necessarily from what they've done in their own kingdoms.
Yeah. So Babylon kind of this weird thing where it gets traded between it, where it's located allows it to get traded between a lot of different like civilizations. So for a time, essentially, it was like in the 19th century, it was founded under Hammurabi. That's what they call the Old Babylonian Empire. Then the Assyrians come in, they rule the city. Then it comes back under Babylonian power, which is weird because you're like, where the Babylonians are, like they just like abandoning the city, going to another city, getting more power, and then going back and taking it back over.
Yeah, I don't know if it was that or like more of an uprising. Like they were just tired of getting their shit pushed in, so they started pushing back.
So prior to, and the two most famous rulers of Babylon are Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar, what was his dad's name? It was Nebuchadnezzar, I think, wasn't it? It was something like that. It's just weird how it was close.
Very close.
So I think it was like Nebuchadnezzar, something like that. So he comes into power. His son, Nebuchadnezzar, he rules Babylon from 605 to 562 BC, which...
It's a long reign back then.
50, what would that be? 57?
48 plus 5, so yeah, 53.
So 53 years, and that's coming up to him.
No, 38. 38 plus 5, so 43.
You're way off. Subtract the 5 from the 62. Oh, we're going 605 to
562.
I hate when I hate having to do BC because then you're having to reverse your math and shit.
Yeah, no, it's 38 years, 562 to 600, then plus 5.
Okay.
So yeah, anyway. 43 years, which again, back then, they just didn't live as long as we do. And the Bible has a weird way of making you think, like, I want to say Noah was like 700 years old or some shit like that.
Oh, yes.
Which sounds just unbelievable.
Well, people used to live longer back then.
How? Because they were so little?
No, I'm trying to remember what the rationale was. Maybe they weren't eating gluten or like...
Well, there was a time when 30 was like old. There was a time when 30 was a grandparent.
That's why they were people were marrying kids off when they were like 13.
Which still just...
You're a woman now.
Amazes me. That was a fairly long reign, and two of Nebuchadnezzar's kind of feathers in his cap was that he was a great wartime leader. He took over a lot of areas. He brought in a lot of, like what we were talking about, there was a lot of cultures that were brought into Babylon because of the wars that he won in the areas that he took over.
Yeah, he would go,
create the trade.
Conquer like another city or civilization, and then almost take the entire populace of like that city and be like, everyone pack your shit. We're going to Babylon. Yeah,
we're moving. Everybody's on their way into the big city now. We
don't want to move.
Changing.
I'm sorry. I did not ask for anybody's opinion. No, I mean, I think he is responsible for probably all of the most famous, known either legends or myths or facts about Babylon, with the Hanging Gardens, the Walls of Babylon, the Ishtar Gate. Was his time also kind of the time in which the Tower of Babel was supposedly there or created?
And in the Bible, it says that the Lord felt like they were trying to get too close to heaven by building such a tall tower, and they had started basically worshiping the tower as like a deity almost.
Yeah, he felt that it was hubris.
So God spread out all of the different builders of the Tower of Babel, either way. I just always learned it as Babel. But he spread them out, and he gave them all different tongues and dialects so they couldn't speak to each other.
Yeah, so it was this entire civilization under like a one language. And so they were able to do these great works. One of them, like you said, Tower of Babel. See, I always called it the Tower of Babel.
And I think that
it's either or.
The language learning system is Babel instead of Babel.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know why I got Babel out of it. It just, maybe that's the way that the Mormons taught it.
So they talk about this tower, and as they built this tower, it got too close to heaven. And yeah, like Adam was saying, so he basically made everyone speak different languages so they couldn't communicate and all unite together, and then spread them all out. But then they eventually found their way back as all these different cultures, so I'm not sure how that worked. So
I think maybe the whole thought process in that would have been that all the creators of it did come from different cities. And so they may have all had different dialects. And they tried to use it as like a negative, as this was a punishment. But in true culture, they probably had figured out a way to speak between each other.
So I had kind of a thought on this. So, back in this time, anything over like, I don't know, most people would never probably see a building over 1 to 2 stories.
No.
Unless you lived in a larger city like Babylon or something like that, where they had stuff that, was 3 and 4 and 5 stories. Probably not even that common with that tall height. Do you think that like any height to any people that were pre-flight would have to like go like 3 stories up and look out and be like, this is fucking nuts. Look how high I am.
I can see my house from here.
Yeah. Like think of it right now. If you'd never flown, because that's I think how people gauge. Once people have flown before or been in a plane, that's then the measure that they use to gauge height. Mm-hmm. But you can still say that's a really tall building.
If you've gone to the Space Needle, the Stratosphere, the Sears Tower, anything like that, and you look out and you see, you can kind of start to get a little gauge of like how high you are.
But like you don't go up to the 2nd floor of your house or like up to like the 4th floor of a building and look out. And it might catch you for a second. We're like, this is a nice view from right here. But you're not thinking to yourself, I'm so high up, I've never experienced this before. The Tower of Babel, they say was only like, I think like 7 or 8 stories. But compared to everything else, this thing was so high that like even people that went up there was like, you're getting too high. You're going to reach heaven. You're not supposed to be up here.
You're going to fall off and you're dead. And that was kind of a cool thing that Nebuchadnezzar did. He just liked height. That was his deal. Between the Tower of Babel, whatever, the walls of Babylon that were around it, that surrounded it, they were talking about those being like 40 to 50 meters high, which is very high.
I think it's 40, 50 feet.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
But
so
even then, 40 to 50 feet, still 5 stories of...
Yes, back then.
That's huge.
I know. And there was 2 of them. So like you had the first
one... The interior and then the exterior?
Yep, so it was the first outer one. Both of them, they say, were like equal height and width. So you had the first one, which they said was 20 feet wide and 50 feet high. They said you could ride a chariot or maybe 2 chariots abreast, like side by side, along the top of it. So at that point, I'm guessing then if the bottom of it's 20, maybe the top of it's 10.
Could be.
And then in between them was this open space of 20 feet, then the exact same wall on the inside of that. So even if an enemy got over the first wall, now you're trapped between these 2 big-ass walls.
You're just sitting ducks.
Yeah, exactly. But the simple fact that this went around the entire... This was not a small city.
200,000 people at its peak, wasn't it?
Yes. And you had these walls around the whole city. Just like, I don't know. I know I always say this, but I think the scope of this kind of stuff just gets really lost on people because I don't think some people have the capacity to be able to like close their eyes and envision it.
No, I would assume it would be like us today trying to go to like the Great Wall of China and seeing it in person. I have ideas about it. I know that you can see it from space and it's that big, but until you're standing in front of it, there's just no way to quantify in your mind.
I don't even know if that really even, I think that will give you a sense of it, But I don't think that even that sense when you're looking at it like this is fucking incredible. I think if you could step back even further and realize, because what do you think the farthest you can see is? At like a point in the Great Wall, if you were to turn and look one way, how many miles could you see it go? And then if you turn the other way, how many miles could you see it go? There's got to be a point along where you can maybe see like the largest section. But that's only just a section of it.
Yeah, it runs for forever.
Yeah. But just like the scope of these guys' buildings and the fact that there's still ruins around today, but like, man, time and nature just like fucks stuff up. Like, well, just in order to exist, like some of the like ruins of Babylon to even still exist today, you know, most of them just gets swallowed up by the desert.
And just for kind of the thought process of how big the Great Wall was compared to what this was and kind of when it happened, we're talking about there were several walls that were built 7th century BC that weren't what we know today as the Great Wall of China. Certain sections were built in 220 to 206 BC, so this is, 400 potential years after Nebuchadnezzar, who was the one that built those walls. So you're talking 400 years, and the best-known sections of the wall, which were built by the Ming Dynasty, was 1368 to 1644. So 1,000+ years that it took them to do something that Nebuchadnezzar was doing.
They're also in the desert, man.
Yeah. They don't have those resources.
No,
they figured out how to make clay bricks very quickly.
Yes. The fact that these are clay bricks that are still around today. Mm-hmm. That's how good they were at developing these things. The big one, I mean, the walls or the Hanging Gardens.
Yeah, and this is our kind of main topic of focus this time, which Babylon in and of itself is really just a mind fuck to try to take all in. Just when I personally was trying to look at just the Hanging Gardens, because there's so many other directions that you want to branch off to and look at and read. And we may do something with Babylon and with the Babylonians later on, but just to gear ourselves.
They'll probably come in pretty significantly during like an Alexander the Great one.
Well, yeah, they show up. A lot of this, they show up just in different subsets, and just like we were talking about with Alexandria and with the lighthouse and with Alexander and all that, he shows up in this story just not necessarily out of nowhere because it was an area that he ruled, but to see how far away things were back then, but how critical these characters were to different parts of these areas that were just so spread out. It's crazy to me.
Or the fact that they even interacted.
Yeah, and the fact that at one time Babylon and Alexandria in Egypt were both a part of the same kingdom.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how these things can be so intertwined.
Well,
so
the thing too is that he loved Babylon so much that he went past Babylon, because I think he had this obsession with like trying to reach portions of Asia or defeating this guy that he'd been kind of in constant battle with. But he then came back to Babylon. So he never went back to, I think, where... I'm trying to think, what was the name of his main place in Macedonia? I can't remember where his headquarters in Macedonia was, but he ended up coming back to Babylon. So he conquered Babylon, welcomed into the city, and stayed there for a while, and then went out, pushed further east, but then came back, and he actually died in Babylon.
Yeah, he died in Babylon, and then on his trip back to that city that you were talking about, his home city or whatever, is when he got stolen and taken to Alexandria. Mm-hmm. Like, he got taken from one place that potentially held one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world to another place that held another one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And I don't know how long that journey would be, but that's a big-ass swath of land.
Yes.
And you're crossing over seas and other things. It just, his episode's probably going to have to be multiple because there's just so much shit that he did. So, but getting back to the gardens, it was just supposed to be a kind of like it transports you to another part of the world.
Yeah, so the whole theory behind the garden was Nebuchadnezzar, his wife, was from I guess I'll preface it with this. So Macedonia is they consider it a very like flat, non-mountainous like area, the whole kind of the empire. She was from a place called, was it Median?
Yeah, I think it was a part of kind of the Fertile Crescent where you would get. It wasn't in the
Like
desert.
hills and like lush forests and stuff like that. So his wife was from this area, and because Macedonia was essentially more of just like a flat, it's a desert, she missed home. And so the legend has it that he built the Hanging Gardens for his wife so she could look out. So he built an artificial mountain and covered it with all of these plants to go ahead and have her be able to look out at, the green lush hills that she was used to growing up. I love looking at the renderings of this because I don't know which one to believe, but they're all just like cool how people would imagine it would look. So I'm just trying to kind of describe it. I mean, everyone has their phone on them, so you can always just Google, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. But it basically looks like what's the word for it? A ziggurat? It was a terrace. So basically,
I would say just a terrace system.
Yeah, so think of making a square cake, and then you put the first square down, then you make a cake that's a square, just a slightly smaller square. So it's basically like, think of a step side pyramid.
Yeah.
Kind of what it is.
That would be good. It was built, I believe, onto the side of their castle, wasn't it?
They were separate, so from the castle you could look out across, and you could see the Hanging Gardens.
Okay.
So the palace is supposed to be across, like the way from the garden, so they could see it. But basically, on these flat sections is where you would create the terraces, and you would be able, bring up dirt and everything like that, cover them in like plants, and then you would get stuff that was overhanging, so you wouldn't be able to see the stone. So it almost looked like some of the sections were almost kind of floating.
And they would put the trees higher up, so it would be like you would be able to almost not necessarily walk under them, but they would be hanging off of the terraces so far that it would feel like they were floating above you. Which, when I first, like before I really looked at a rendering and I thought Hanging Gardens, I thought it was just like big pots that were hanging
on chains.
above.
That's
everything.
kind of that's what I had. But now looking at it, I can see like you could either call it the Hanging Gardens because there were plants that like just these huge like ivies and like creepers that were hanging off of it. So it looked like it was almost the building was more plant than it was actually building and not seeing the pillars and everything. But can you even imagine like during the daytime when the sun started setting behind it, if you were to look at the shadow of it, it would just look like a mountain because there would be plants, shadows, and everything like that.
It's always going to be cooler in that area too because you're going to have shade, which you don't have in the desert anywhere.
So the kind of cool thing about the Hanging Gardens is it's the one the one wonder, the seven wonders of the ancient world. It's the one that has some questionability on if it actually exists. And I think it's probably even leaning toward more so now that people don't think it exists. Or it was in a different spot, maybe.
Yeah, it had existed. I do firmly believe, and we talked about this before the show, I firmly believe that these Hanging Gardens existed. I think they may have been a little bit off on their trajectory and where they were, but it absolutely was possible that this was a place that did exist. And
the arguments are, I've seen the arguments of like the camp of three arguments. One is they're looking for foundations, because that's what they really look for in a lot of these situations is the foundation. Can this have supported a building this big? So they haven't found any of the foundations that would be able to support the weight of these gardens or like the building structures, which is fine. That's an argument, but the simple fact is that they've excavated like a fraction of the area of Macedonia, or sorry, not Macedonia, of Babylon for the like dig site. So there's a lot of stuff they could still find. The other one about it was that the only time it's been described is it's not the first-hand accounts that's describing them. It's somebody describing someone telling them the first-hand account. So it's like there's a separation for people that didn't describe it. The times that it has been described, there's a question is if it was even constructed at that time. Like Alexander mentions it, or something within Alexander's writings mentions it.
His scribes were the ones that
and then
described what it was.
Who's the other guy? Was it Herodotus?
Herodotus talked about it. He was a lot later on. I want to say like he was 300 or 400 years.
Yes.
There was
so
a
that's
fellow
what I'm
named
saying is like a lot of the descriptors of it are kind of from not first-hand accounts. But
Josephus, a guy that I think was in the Bible too, had described it, but his accounts came from, I want to say it was right around 200 BC, so a good portion of time after.
Did they
would've
describe it in a
existed.
positive light or a negative light? Because most of the stuff in the Bible about Babylon was just, it was basically kind of like Sodom and Gomorrah, the way they kind of looked at it.
Dens of sin and different things. He described it as, I want to say he was one that described it as kind of like a marvel of engineering to be in the middle of the desert, but to still have that much of a lush green area. And that's what makes it a little bit tough to try to figure it out and to nail it down, but kind of adds to the allure of it is everywhere else we have, like the Colossus of Rhodes, we have where that
We saw the
was.
foundations of it and stuff, and yeah.
And the lighthouse in Alexandria, we also saw where that had fallen into the ocean. So there were points in history where we know where it is.
Well, and technically, the only one that even exists today that you can see is the Pyramid of Giza.
Yeah, it's still the only one that's in existence. But there's certain kind of topographical maps that people have looked at in the areas of Babylon, because this was a very big, like a tall place where you would have to have changed the landscape enough to see that how high that it rose and where the dip was, where you could actually walk around kind of beneath it and underneath it. And looking at the topography of where they know Babylon was and kind of where they know where it is, it just doesn't quite hit right that it could have been a terrorist system like that. So there's more question as to where it is, because they can't find like where the topography would raise enough to give them enough area to do it.
Okay. Well, the other thing too is like, how do you water something like this? Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm not conveying this correctly, but this thing is supposed to be massive.
Yeah, it was tens of meters tall. It was 50, 60 feet in the air potentially.
So, like, you can't just have guys, like, carrying water up and watering these plants. These are, like, full-size trees and, like, bushes and everything like that. So, one of the kind of the arguments against it is, like, well, how do they keep it watered to have everything growing? Like, at this time, you know, I don't think we look at this kind of era and think, like, you know, technology or anything like that. But the Babylonians were really good about, like, or aqueduct systems. They were kind of the precursors to Romans being able to do that. And essentially, do you kind of know how the aqueduct system, what the principle behind it is?
Yeah, it's like a canal system that brings waters from different areas.
Correct.
To...
The trick about it, and this made me have even kind of made it seem more impressive, the trick about it was they had to design it in a way where it sped up the flow of water. It couldn't just like have a constant flow. They had to, because what they would do is they had to build up pressure so when it got to where it was going, there was enough pressure to then force it to like all the fountains and water areas of town. So they'd almost have to like get it going downhill to a degree.
Grade it down towards where it was headed.
Exactly. And then once it got there, hopefully that built enough pressure going down that it could then even take it up if it needed to go.
Yeah, so, if you have a heavier water flow going down, it'll still force it back up like it does
like
in
a half distance or a
stream.
Quarter distance is exactly. So one of the things is like, well, then how did they water all this kind of stuff? Well, since they were, you know, well adept at creating aqueducts, that's one of the theories is that they used an aqueduct system. They also had this thing. Have you heard of this thing called an Archimedes screw?
I have. We talked about it in the Alexandria
one? Did we?
episode,
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Archimedes screw, essentially think of like it seems like even you know how you used to have the water wheel that has the buckets on it that then, you know, it's so weird to think, but this is so much more of an advanced form of that, but it was so much longer ago. So you would have basically, think of just like a giant screw where instead of like, how am I trying to describe this? Like the blades on it are a lot bigger.
The best way that I could describe it would be like, you know, like an ice auger. How it has kind of the flat tines that come out as the teeth and they're up in a spiral pattern.
Or like a snowblower. The thing, if you look at the front of a snowblower and
Yeah.
everything, kind of like how you have it in your Traeger too. It it's basically the way it spins is it's angled and it just moves stuff along very slowly, but it doesn't let it fall backwards.
It moves stuff along the ridge of the actual screw
Correct,
teeth.
it carries it with it. So you can do that with water. So you would just, instead of having it face sideways, you would have it face up and down. And these Archimedes screws, they could have them be powered by, I think you would have a water wheel. Part of the water would be diverted off to power a water wheel, which would turn the screws. Part of the water would then be flooded into where the screws were, and it would carry water up.
As long as there was a constant flow to feed from, it would continue moving up the screw.
Exactly, because it couldn't go back. So that was one of the theories, is that you could just design an Archimedes screw to take the water up to the very top, start watering it, and then anything that overflowed would just then go into the other terraces. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy to think about the fact that that type of like irrigation, like plumbing like that, even existed back then.
Oh, yeah, just the thought process and the mind that it would have to be. And we'll talk about that kind of more when we get to where I personally kind of think that the gardens were. But one of the issues that they have with Nebuchadnezzar being the one that created the gardens of Babylon was the man liked to brag about a lot of the stuff that he did. He was very boisterous in his writings about building the walls and building the gates of Ishtar and the other religious buildings that they had in Babel. He wrote about a lot of that stuff to kind of prolong his memory of, like, people thought, okay, he was a great builder. Mm. He didn't ever really mention the gardens. Like, it was, to all other accounts at this point in time, a engineering feat to be able to do that. Like, you're talking about an Archimedes screw, which I want to say they said was...
It would look like magic to everybody.
Yeah, and it was kind of designed, I think Archimedes was right around like 300 BC, maybe something like that. Mm-hmm. Whereas this was in the 600, the 6th century BC, the 5th century BC, around there. So much further back in time that this could have been in existence. It would have been something that you'd think that he definitely would have written about. Like, he would have written about it. Yeah. He would have wanted...
They invented writing so they could write all their shit down. Mm-hmm. They literally invented a thing because they wanted to keep track of their shit and what they did.
Yeah, you can't describe this in a system of knots or like just a picture. You wanted to have some sort of verbal understanding that this was your achievement.
Think of that too. You know, this is at a time when feats that like rulers could perform, that they could then say, like, see this, the fact that this is happening while I'm ruling, this is like totally divine. So this tells all of you that I'm supposed to be ruling. Don't fucking try to overthrow me, because all this shit goes away if I leave. It's like, can you imagine constructing those gardens and having people be like, the stuff never, it's so huge anyway. It's this mountain of stone and plants, but they never die. Like, how do they get water? I know what plants need water. And he's like, don't worry about it. Like, it's because, you know, I created this.
Yeah, it raises you to such a godlike level that you're creating terrain. Mm-hmm. And still being able to, like, feed and water these trees that are 30, 40 feet in the air. And the Archimedes screw makes total sense to do it, because it was something that they could bury in the walls of the terrace system where it would never be seen by the people.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So they wouldn't understand the magic that's going on. Mm-hmm. All they know is that these things keep growing and they keep getting water. And it seems like something that he just would have had to have pointed out.
Here's the other thing, too. What if, you know, over time stuff does go ahead and get built up? What if the Hanging Gardens weren't, you know, as enormous as it says they were? Because alone, the technological engineering in it and the fact that it could exist like that, that's what's really impressive about it. Maybe that makes it larger, you know, larger than life. So even if it's half the size they say it is, but it's a 4-story building. Most people have never seen, first of all, a 4-story building, let alone a 4-story building with plants growing over it that looks like, you know, a stone mountain or this terrace system, or some of the pictures they have of it looks like Roman columns and everything. But nonetheless, it's going to be just insanely impressive.
Looking at the renderings of it, it felt so much like the Venetian.
Yes.
Just with the way that it steps down the terrace system and you can walk around and there's different fountains.
Like, I looked at some of the pictures and I was like, is this Vegas or is this real?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it looks like.
I'm surprised there isn't actually, there probably is a hotel somewhere in the world like this. But the fact that this isn't a Vegas hotel yet, that 30 years probably. Mm-hmm. The Babylon, how's that not an excellent name for a fucking hotel casino?
Yeah. And maybe it's just the fact that it's so war-torn right now that it's not a good look. But getting back into kind of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, this was something that I learned that just kind of absolutely mystified me, because when I think of back then and the times that they were living in, my mind really only thinks about like the working class of people that just really worked to survive. But there was a hierarchy of people that had money, that didn't have to go out and bust their ass every day to stay alive. They had big families. And the original list of the seven wonders of the world was kind of like a pamphlet that was given out to everybody. It was written by a guy named Philo of Byzantium. Mm-hmm. And it was like a seven must-see.
Right here at the top that says Philo of Byzantium decided the seven wonders.
Yeah, like, how does he get to do it? I know that there were other lists that came out, but the one that we stuck with was basically like a pamphlet. Like, what were you talking about before? The
Frommers.
Yeah, it was like
a Frommers guide.
It was like a guide to travel for the ancient civilizations that people would take their families to see, like on vacation. Like, you would travel to go see these destinations by God knows what, by chariot,
it'd be chariot,
walking,
boat, horse, walk. I mean, it'd be a little bit of everything. To do this, though, would have to be like the ultimate brag.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't think that many... To have seen all the seven wonders of the ancient world, first of all, I'm trying to think... I'm not going to be able to look it up, but the time frame in which they all existed concurrently and how big that window was. Secondly, you had to have the means, like you were saying, to do it. Third, you actually had to be willing to risk probably, I'm trying to think of the odds. With this much traveling to this many foreign lands, even if you had bodyguards with you, what do you think, 50-50? Someone in your party's going to die?
Yeah, I would say that probably wouldn't be a stretch to say that somebody died on each one of these trips, because you're traveling through contested lands to get to these places too still.
And regardless of if you have a guard with you or anything like that, you could be losing guys. That's not to say that members of your guard aren't dying and getting picked off now and then.
And having to have the supplies to lead a party like that through the desert.
You don't have a fucking ATM card. You can't just pull cash wherever. You're carrying your treasure with you, so anybody that sees you traveling and you look wealthy...
You're just sitting ducks.
I know.
I wish that it was so much more like the Flintstones movie. You remember the one where they have like the little foot cars and he works... And the one with Dan Aykroyd in it.
You're thinking about John Goodman.
John Goodman, yeah.
Rick Moranis.
Oh, Rick Moranis was...
He's Barney.
Barney, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to think like they had like big pterodactyls that would carry them to different areas, or like they
you're
had...
thinking about ancient civilizations.
Yeah. Like they had like a dinosaur bus.
Like their houses were basically two stones standing up, a stone and a big flat stone on the roof, and like the door and everything. Yeah.
But that's the way I want to think about it. But you had your feet, you had wheels, you had carts, you had, like I say, horse-drawn chariots. Mm-hmm. You were probably getting pulled by other livestock. But either way, that travel fucking sucked. Like, there was no good part about that. So to go see one of these places...
Do you think you take someone with you that's like a minstrel so you can have, like, road music?
You'd probably end up killing him, like, an hour in. Because he'd just forget playing what he was playing and start playing the same shit.
I would start thinking something else. Because, I mean, if you have this money, you obviously have your choice of minstrels. And what kind of minstrel is going to be like... No, like, I don't want to go see the seven wonders of the ancient world. Like, fuck yeah, I'm going to do that. What I'm wondering, though, is it would suck even more so if, like, halfway through your trip, he got, like, the fucking fever. And he fucking died, and for the rest of your trip, you're just like... Or, like, 2 days into your trip, and the rest of the time, you're just like... Can you imagine that? That's the equivalent of, like, your radio fucking breaking. Or losing reception.
I don't know if they would have enough to be able to continue playing, though, because, like, if you listen to a channel on Sirius for long enough, you'll eventually start hearing the same songs. And you're doing this day in and day out. This guy has to have a catalog that's only so big.
I understand that, but I'm saying he doesn't have to be singing.
No.
But the simple fact that he's there...
A distraction.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure they could buy other minstrels in other cities. It's just... to think about the amount of land that they would have had to have covered for a family vacation, like... Excuse me, this makes Chevy Chase and all the vacation movies just look like nothing. I don't know why it just amazes me that there was like a travel pamphlet, Frommers style back then, because this was written in 225 BC.
I wonder how he put together, because I don't think he saw, the whole theory is he didn't see all of these.
He wrote it kind of from home.
Yes. So he was like writing this from home, but like, what have I heard about? So is this guy actually somebody that just kind of like hung out down at the docks and just like, or like hung out at bars and was like looking for stories about these fantastical things that people have seen? And they're like, yeah, this exists. And he's like, really? he writes it down, and then all of a sudden, all he needs is one other person to be like, "Have you seen this?" And he's like, "Okay, it exists. 2 people have said about it. I'm gonna make my list."
And to look back at maybe the people before that had come back from traveling and written down their travels to...
How many other wonders were there that were on other people's lists that we don't know about? Because like the whole thing is with Babylon and the Hanging Gardens. Do we only, of course the Bible discussed Babylon, but was it only as kind of like, did people only really go look for it and try to unearth it because of like these legends of like the Hanging Gardens and everything?
It absolutely could be. My thought process is you would have to get by these otherworldly walls and go through like the Ishtar Gate that was a gigantic kind of fabulous lead in to the city, going through the different walls to get into the city.
It was like, it reminds me of going into like, I know I keep going back to this. It reminds me of going into like the main, where they would drop you off for like a stay at your casino or your hotel in Vegas, and you walk in and you're just like the lobby.
The lobby blows your pants off as soon as you get in.
Exactly. So the Ishtar Gate, the best way I can actually kind of describe it, not the gate itself, but kind of how the city was set up. So when you have cities like this that have like, are surrounded by these walls, kind of think like King's Landing from Game of Thrones, at these entry points around the city, and they had different names. Some of them were bigger, some of them were smaller. So the Ishtar Gate was this famous gate.
It was like the 8th or 9th.
Yeah, it was like the 8th or the 9th gate. And what was so crazy about it was the gate was made from bricks that had been like dyed blue. And so think of like this kind of patchwork work. I mean, it was all different shades of blue, but when you look at it, it's one of those things that looks all kind of a cohesive color. Mm-hmm. And then it also had like yellow smaller bricks in it. And then was it dragons and rams?
I never got to look it up. I knew that it was adorned just in a crazy manner.
It's crazy. It almost looks like, I'm trying to think of the size comparison I could give it. I don't know if it was a replica that was at the German Museum, because I know they actually had it at one point. I think they might have had to return it. But I mean, it's pretty huge. But the fact that it has like these like golden rams and dragons like emblazoned on it, like painted on it, and that this stuff actually like withstood the test of time. Like the one that like the Germans had when they first got the original, it still looked. The bricks were still blue and everything.
The pigment was still in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just looking at the picture now, it looks like the gate to a castle where you have a massive archway that, again, archways back in that time were revolutionary. Archways still kind of blow me away, like the pressure points and the systems of how it works.
And how it presses to the outside, but that keeps enough pressures on the stone from dropping down without,
Yeah, it just is a marvel. And the pigments that they used look like they were just very strong pigments, and they did have just a million different kinds of animals that were inscribed into the stone. To me, this seems like this would have qualified as an ancient wonder of the world before you even got to the gardens. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the walls of Babylon. Like, you had to cross through other ancient marvels.
That's what I'm saying. Like, what was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14? Like, what were those wonders that didn't make the cut?
Well, we know that the walls existed. We know that the gate existed. We're not so sure that the gardens existed, which makes me wonder is... Like, did they just get it wrong? Like, was it in a different area?
Well, here's my theory, too. Is if... You were talking about this earlier. It's like the city is basically in like a war zone. Mm-hmm. And it gets conquered. Like, even pre-Babylon, before Nebuchadnezzar, it came under, like, rule by Persians, the Assyrians. Like, these different cultures at one point, or, like, civilizations occupied it. At what point does somebody look at the gardens who's taken over the city and says, I can't, everyone knows this is Nebuchadnezzar's. Like, I don't think I can rewrite the history on this. Or hates the previous civilization in there so much that they come in and they destroy what, like, their city was famous for.
Hate fuck everything that was a big
draw. How often do you think that has happened? We've seen it happen in different civilizations. You just come in.
We
you
still
fuck
see it
everything
happen
up.
today.
Yeah. But
to
I
a,
also
to
think
a smaller extent, the fact that we were talking about Las Vegas, there's hotels in Vegas that were blown up on the strip to create bigger hotels. Like it's, you want to create your own legacy over somebody else's.
that's the other thing too, is what's to say that one of these rulers that came into Babylon after didn't say, you know what, let's tear it down. I'm going to make it better or make it bigger. But at the point when it got torn down and everything was, before they had a chance to rebuild it, someone else came in.
They got
management.
fucked up again.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's take a quick pee break.
Okay.
And then we can head into it.
Sounds good. All right. Oh, okay. So the thing I wanted to go back on real quick is the Tower of Babel. So I'm not saying like the tower in which like the Bible describes the legend is true, but I think there is something that inspired that. I don't know if we went into what actually inspired the biblical version of it was. So I think what they're saying the biblical version took inspiration from in Babylon was there was a temple. So the Babylonians, they had this god, and his name was Marduk. And he had a huge temple, and the temple was the way it's been described. There's two different types of like descriptions or renderings. I can't remember which one is the biblical one, which one is the regular one, or a historical one. One of them is more of kind of that thing like I was describing, like the ziggurat, like the almost step-side pyramid. It was more of a pyramid, but it had like the path to get up, almost like instead of being huge steps that went up it, there were some steps that went straight up it, but then it almost had like a road, like a little path that looped around it. The other rendering of it is, did you ever see the Return of the King? The Lord of the Rings, the third one?
Yeah.
Okay, the white city that they're in that's kind of like circular, and it looks like it has all the different tiers going up. That's kind of what they showed the Tower of Babel is as well. So it could be like that tiered kind of tower.
I always kind of thought of it as, and this is just hearing it in like church and in verbal form without a lot of pictures, like almost like a leaning Tower of Pisa, except for straight.
That's how, for some reason, that's kind of how my mind went to it for a minute too.
It seems like a tower, and that would be like construction of a straight up building, but I don't know. They couldn't have had the advancement at that point to be able to build something without having a step tier system.
I think what it is they're saying it was the Temple of Marduk, which that just fucking sounds like a cool god's name.
Yeah.
That sounds like something if someone came out now and was like, all hail Marduk, they'd be like, what fucking planet is he from?
Hey, it's like the Zoltans.
Where do I sign up?
Yeah. Get me in on this. This guy sounds a lot cooler and more mystical than a lot of the other ones. That's part of the other reason why I love like Buddhism and that kind of stuff is when you come into names like Vishnu and Buddha, they got a story.
Yeah, why is God's name just God? Is it because we're not supposed to know his real name? Is that a thing?
I've never gotten that
or
deep
was it that there were other gods around at the time and they're like, what's your God's name? They're like, he doesn't have a name, it's just God.
He is who he is.
Yeah, that's who he is.
The creator. I don't know. Things like Jesus that come up in these different names, like Daniel, all the books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all those people, those all seem like normal names. God and Jesus seem like their names were chosen in a different way. In different cultures, it's Yahweh, and there's different names for it, but it just seems like God is such a simple name.
That's true. Maybe it was meant to stand out because everyone could know a Matthew or everyone could know a Mark or a Luke or...
Nobody's knowing a God.
Yeah.
And until we got into Spain and South America, Jesus was non-existent.
So with the Hanging Gardens, what's kind of the actual more realistic theory for them actually existing, just not being in Babylon? And here's the other thing too. Even if they're in this, what's the name of the city they think it's in?
Nineveh.
Nineveh? How far was Nineveh?
Nineveh is about 300 miles away from Babylon. So
is it still within the Macedonian, like that?
Yeah,
still within that area?
It's in northern Iraq. It's right next to Mosul in Iraq.
Okay, so I'm wondering if it's just one of the things where, because there's thinking it was part of the Babylonian Empire, all of a sudden it was called now the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
And there's some questions as to how it all happened. And Nineveh was an Assyrian city. And the king of Nineveh, I'm going to fuck this name up so bad, and I heard it so many times. Sennacherib, something like that. King Sennacherib had gone over and fought with Babylon before. They were close enough to where they were kind of warring factions.
Okay.
And he did like a lot of the things that he did see in Babylon, and they kind of took some of the identity back. So there could be a little bit of a mix-up and a confusion, because Alexander and his people did go through Nineveh as well. They were there, they had occupied it, and along those stops, there is a chance that they could have gotten confused with the king talking about Babylon enough to where they may have thought that it could have been Babylon before they actually got there. But one of the big things that they have found in Nineveh is the king did so much writing about the garden that he had built that he almost had laid out like what you would think Babylon was. And these are actually first written accounts that still exist from him in cuneiform. And cuneiform to me seems like the craziest thing, because the documentary that I watched said that there's only still like a handful of people in the world that can actually read and translate cuneiform. And if you look at it, the way that the dashes are and the way that it's built, I look at it and it doesn't look like anything. It looks like a pattern on a drawing. But somehow there's still these people around that have been trained to be able to translate that into different languages and still understand and try to pick up the meanings that they use when they were making the cuneiform.
What if these people are all just in agreement and they just have a meetup and they're like, guys, honestly, we all know that we can't read any of this stuff, so we're all just going to get on the same page and translate everything the same. Here's the alphabet. Here's what it looks like. We're going to be consistent across the board, and people will just think that we understand this.
And this is a thought that I had a lot reading it, was if they translated something, you just can't be like, nah, that doesn't make any sense, because you can't prove it.
No,
like,
absolutely.
It's the greatest thing ever to just say, well, okay, you don't believe that this is my translation, you go ahead and translate it. Oh,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can't? Okay, well, guess what?
Oh,
I was
shut the
trained
fuck
in
up.
this. Yep. You know what I'd do if I didn't have any evidence? I'd shut the fuck up.
Just kind of, and I don't know if you went this far into it. So with that being a Syrian city or a Syrian area, and they kind of went back and forth like battles with Babylon, did it eventually get taken over by the Babylonian Empire?
Nineveh?
Yeah.
Nineveh ended up, I think, being taken over by Alexander. So
Okay.
it became a part of his empire. But
Okay. And the whole thing about it, though, is Alexander had heard about the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. I was just trying to see it from a standpoint of if, like, Babylon was able to conquer Nineveh, absorbed it into their empire, and then it became part of Babylonia. If they were like, well, technically you guys know that this is now Babylon territory, so these are our Hanging Gardens now.
yeah, it absolutely could have been in the same area. 300 miles away kind of seems like a ways for that to happen, but it could have just been, I mean, his empire was so big, they could have put them together. I just want to listen to this real quick because I want to see if I can get this right.
Is it the name?
Yeah.
We are looking at how to pronounce these.
Have you ever done these pronunciations on YouTube?
No.
This guy sounds like the biggest pervert ever.
As well as to say more confusing biblical names that many mispronounce, so make sure to stay tuned to the channel. How do you say it? Sennacherib. Stress on that second syllable. It's easy.
Stop it. It's actually making me feel weird listening to his voice.
Yeah, it's kind of like an ASMR. It gets you a little horny.
It sounds like, like a horny Vincent Price is what it sounds like.
So, Sennacherib was the king, and
Sennacherib,
yeah. He wrote a lot about the gardens that he had created, and he had created a tier system off of the side of his kingdom, which is kind of where I got confused. But the way that he did it is they would build these terraces, like is talked about for the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and along with the bricks, he would reinforce it with lead to try to hold in as much water as possible. So it was almost like the bricks were also conduits to holding the water to help feed the plants and things. And he had, first off,
Was
Nineveh.
this the one where he had the stamps on the bricks? Mm-hmm. They would actually, like, each brick almost looked like it was stamped. It may have been stamped because they were clay, right?
They were clay bricks, yeah.
Okay.
Nineveh is near modern day Mosul, which is like one of the worst places in the world as far as like terrorist attacks and different things that go on. There's the number of bombings they were talking about that happened in a month was just staggering, like how scary it was. But Nineveh was near the Tigris River, and so they had
Which is weird because, well, it's probably not weird, but Babylon was on the Euphrates. Didn't it straddle the Euphrates on each side?
Babylon?
Yeah.
It could have.
I think it was on each side of the, yeah.
So they had a water source, but I forgot how to pronounce it. Sennacherib
Sennacherib
was a really good canal and aqueduct maker. And they actually had canals and aqueducts that they dug that were millions of bricks long, and they were up in the mountains that they would collect this water, and they would bring them down and they would funnel them down. And he had written about their water systems and how he would get it up. And he had mentioned an alamitu, which an alamitu is a palm tree that you get figs from. And as you're cutting up the fronds as they grow, you cut them up, but the way that the fronds grow, they grow in a circular pattern that goes up like a screw. So his mention...
That's right. It was, the translation was date palm.
Yeah, which it's an alamitu date palm tree.
Yeah, and so, like, they're saying, like, much how we use some words that describe something completely different. That's what it is, a date palm. He was just saying date palm because that's what gave him the inspiration for the screw shape. Yeah, like...
When you create something and you have to put a word to it, the only way that you can really describe it
is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his use
You don't have a word to say what it is yet.
You haven't named it yet, so you just have to describe other things that look like it. So his use of the word alamitu made people believe that the actual way that the palm trees are cut with the screw shape would be how the water was fed up the different areas. And this was in the 7th century BC. So we're talking hundreds of years before Archimedes' screw became like a known thing. So they think that that was how it was fed up. And there was a lady who, she's just the sweetest old British gal that you've ever met. And she was a big part of the documentary. Her name was is Dr. Stephanie Dowley. She's still alive. But she was kind of the first one to really look at the area and see that these gardens that were talked about kind of were more typical to what you would hear about the hanging gardens in Babylon. So she actually went around Mosul, which was very dangerous, and went up into the mountains and saw the beginnings of these canal systems. And it's just so crazy that she would walk up in an area of the desert in these mountains, and then she would look down in these ravines, and you can see the outlines of these little bricks that were put in place, and enough to where they would be slanted down, so you would have like a wider canal at the top and a narrower canal at the bottom.
To kind of like force the water,
Yeah.
like in a smaller area,
Yep.
force the pressure, like increase the pressure.
And these rocks that were put in certain areas in the canals to divert water and feed them into aqueducts. And I want to say at one point it's like a 20-mile stretch across the desert that this canal fed water into.
Well, I'm like thinking about these civilizations, especially, the ones in this area of the world, that was priority number one. Was water. So
It had
that
to
was
be.
literally like their technology and what they were great at advanced along the lines of survival. It's like they had to be good at transporting water. They were like, we can't always live near a water source. Look how much other area there is here. And then even when they did live near a water source, they're like, well, we have to be able to figure out how to get this water from here to here.
And unlike other civilizations where that was their main idea, Nineveh had figured out a way to where they had the Tigris there. They had enough water to sustain their people. They had also figured out enough water to divert them to have amenities, like to have an actual garden that was fed. And one of the really cool things about the documentary that I watched on her was she ends up hooking up with another historian who was actually, he was a member of, not the CIA, it might have been the FBI, it was some governmental organization, but he had actually gotten a hold of topographical maps that they would use during wartime to see where to bomb. So he has these topographical maps laid out of where the city of Nineveh was, and you can see the darker lines where the canals would lead in and like where the bigger streets were. And she could actually see the topography of where a set of terraces would have been that would have been where the actual
Hanging Gardens.
hanging gardens were. And the renderings that we get now of the hanging gardens, like there's certain ones where you see almost like a pool down below. Mm-hmm. And that was more reminiscent of what Sennacherib, whatever his name was,
Sennacherib,
the king wrote about. Because he did talk more about having like almost like a little pond underneath, and these Alamitu kind of pre-screws were drawing the water up from there, up these terraces to get to the trees. And it just, to know that there was an actual footprint to see that this was going on kind of lends me to believe that it really was just a case of mistaken identity. Like the Gardens of Babylon were technically the Gardens of Nineveh, but the people that were traveling in that area were probably hitting Babylon and Nineveh at the same time.
That's what I was going to ask is, do you think, like, how crazy would it be? So they do go with Philo, Philo of Byzantium. They go with his list of this. What if the information he got, the guy that gave him the information thought he was in Babylon, was just like a traveler?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, like, this is crazy. Like, look at these hanging gardens, like, of Babylon. And he just went away with that information. He's like, have you been to Babylon? They have these hanging gardens.
Well, and anything that ended up in these 7 ancient wonders of the world had to have been visited, but how long had they been visited before? Like, were they still in existence? Mm-hmm. So if you get something that's 200 years old, if you wrote this in 225 BC, but Nebuchadnezzar maybe supposedly did this around like 600 BC, there's 400 years that information could get screwed up enough to where it may have ended up in Nineveh instead of Babylon because it had been passed down for so many years. You know how telephone works. You know how that game goes. It's always going to be a little bit different just from the way that people tell and describe things. So accounts that he uses could have only been 300 miles off, but it would have been an Assyrian city instead of a Babylonian city.
One thing that something you just said kind of leads me into it is, the telephone game. Have you ever kind of been watching like a documentary like this, and you see the ruins and think that maybe that's how people view something always looked? Like, that's what color was. It was that clay color. Like, because if you really just kind of think about it, all of the ruins look either like that weathered white stone or like clay and everything. But you then look at like the renderings of how they had it, and you're just like, oh yeah, this stuff wasn't that color like when they originally did that. Like, they had this stuff like painted. There were plants everywhere.
There were pigments in the bricks.
There were pigments.
Their colors.
Like, they had dyes and everything. And not just that, but it wouldn't be just the colors that you were seeing on like the stone. It would be like all of the like in the market and along the streets and all that kind of stuff. And you kind of like lose sight of how almost impressive that would look. Like, even if they were to uncover like a whole scope of ruins, like you look at the Pyramid of Giza is, I think, the best example. You look at it and you're like, that is so fucking impressive. It's so huge and it's so precise and all the bricks had to fit in. But at one point, it's completely, forgotten about that used to be smooth.
Perfect.
So
those joints used to line up exactly the same.
All of those steps, there used to be triangular blocks that were set in that made the entire thing. And then there was also supposed to be the cap piece of it was supposed to be gold. And that was like over the years, the how it was actually like removed. And it wouldn't surprise me, like if you think about it, those triangular pieces would be the first pieces to go for looting and everything. They would be the lightest because they weren't as big.
And they would be stepped on. The rains that would hit it, the water, the winds. You get enough sand and wind that's blowing through, it's gonna knock down pieces of those.
It's going to weather
stones.
it. And it's also going to be like, when you're trying to loot up higher on that to get that gold off, you're probably going to knock those off to make yourself a stairway to get that stuff off.
Absolutely.
But
And
just the fact that that thing used to be like even more impressive than it is, like just magnificently like impressive. And so like you look at like Babylon and we only have the ruins, but then you look at like what they know or could guess was built on these foundations and ruins, and you're just like, that looks amazing.
well,
It's like a oasis in the desert, like a paradise.
and yeah, one of the other kind of crazy things about the documentary with the doc in it was she was walking through Sennacherib's castle, and she would walk up to something and she'd say, "Oh, look at this! This was a carving of a lion inside this." And you look at it, it's like, "No, bitch, that's just a stone." And then as she starts to trace it out and you see the different depths and you start to see where the feet are and where the tail comes off of it, and then it kind of becomes alive to the point where you think that absolutely was a lion because of the way that it just had been weathered down
Just
or
that,
beaten
that
down over
lens
time.
that she has that sees those things you don't see, and then once she points it out, you're like, oh, that couldn't be anything but that.
Yeah, it has to be that. And one of the other reasons that they sort of believed that Nineveh was where the Hanging Gardens were was they actually have stone inscriptions that they've pulled from the castle that are in like different buildings and different libraries of history, where you see they inscribe these trees on top of a building, on top of like columns. Excuse me. So they had that image in their head that they had to have drawn from somewhere that really only could have come from the idea, excuse me again, of these hanging gardens because they were so high in these pictures. And when you see that, you think, okay, well, they had knowledge of this. They could have done it because they saw the hanging gardens in Babylon. But none of that was ever written about or found in Babylon. The only place that it was ever written about was Nineveh. So it leads you to believe that they were real, but they just may have missed the mark. And regardless of if they were in Nineveh, if they were in Babylon, they were still something that was so remarkable that people did continue to write about them that they saw. And there's only a few writings that have survived, but they would have had to have been convincing enough writings that this Philo fella decided to put in the Seven Wonders.
I think there's two likely scenarios here. And it's that
Oh my god, I
there might
have to
only
pee
be one,
again.
actually, huh?
I have to pee again.
Okay.
Holy shit.
Do you think it's at high noon? It's a big can.
Yeah, normally it's just whiskey. I really fucked myself on that one.
I was gonna say, you seem like you're going for more refreshing today.
A little bit. It's the pants.
I was gonna say you're in it's a whole mode you're in.
Whole vibe. Oh. Yeah, so I don't necessarily think that it never existed. I just think it may have been a case of mistaken identity.
That's what I think it was, and I think it's more likely because it is mentioned. As far as I don't know, are the hang gardens aren't mentioned? Are they mentioned in the Bible?
No.
Okay, so in that scenario, I think it's much more likely that the information that Philo got was just from somebody who thought they were in Babylon and saw the hanging gardens.
Yeah.
Or someone met someone and talked to someone who thought they were in Babylon, and it just the stories got crossed at some point, and there was never any. Because you would think too, like I know that it's rare for writings. They have to be very famous, very well kept to survive. So, the fucking Diary of Clark Griswold going to Wally World isn't going to be something that probably is going to stand the test of time. Much like a family trying to go see the Seven Wonders. This one too, wasn't this one the hardest one to get to? It is. Remember, this was the one that we said was inland.
Oh, everything else you could do by boat usually.
Yeah, it was usually right close to the Mediterranean. Okay, so I do want to believe that this is real. I believe it is probably likely that it was in a different city, but I think that the reason that it's believed that it was in Babylon is probably because there wasn't a lot of opportunity to verify it. During this whole Seven Wonders of the World thing, I'm guessing that if people were going to try to do the Seven Wonders of the World, they would do the closest ones to them around first, and this would be safe for last.
And if they lived through the first few.
That's what I was going to say. If there was anybody still left to go to this one, or if Nana fucking died or some shit like that, they had to dump her into the Mediterranean. They're like, yeah, Nana's gone. We got to make 2 more stops and then we're done.
She'll make her way home.
Yeah.
The river will take her home.
But yeah, I think stuff like this, did, because there are mentions of it at several different points of writing and stuff. But I don't know. It's just cooler to think about it actually existing. And it probably did. It was probably just in Nineveh. Goddamn Philo.
Yeah, this is definitely what I feel like is a case of mistaken identity, but it doesn't.
It doesn't diminish it. It doesn't. To me, it doesn't diminish the fact that Babylon, because Babylon also had, like you said, it was the Tower of Babel, that huge temple. Just in general, even without the Hanging Gardens, the fact that it was the largest city in the world until Rome, actually.
Is that?
Yeah, until Rome surpassed that size.
Huh.
But I think I even mentioned this to you. It's just very strange to me in these scenarios where this is literally was the largest population in the world, and it's completely gone now. So much so that this entire city that was made out of stone and everything was abandoned and just swallowed up by the desert, to where it has to be dug down to find it.
Yeah.
Time is a motherfucker, dude.
That's one of the crazy things that they were talking about in the documentary when she was following around in the canals, was the canals you can still see, but back in the time when it was just water flowing through them, they didn't have any time to collect any of the dust or seed or soil or anything that's in there now, because there's just been so many years that they haven't flooded and actually run, that there's reeds and different things growing up in it. So you almost have to know that there's definitely a water source in there, because there are green plants growing inside these canals.
So it almost looks like it's the canal part has been filled with soil, and it's only, so almost it looks like someone buried kind of a V-shaped or half a pipe in the ground, and you're only seeing the top edges that are still sticking out of the ground.
Yeah, you can still see the diversionary rocks, but there is a stripe of green that's going through a bunch of brown.
That's sitting in the
canals.
The drawing.
Because it's still collecting water eventually from the mountains when they do get it, that it's still growing different things in them.
You're going to get enough leaves falling in that are going to turn into mulch, that are going to turn into soil. That, give it enough time, the desert will swallow everything, and the forest will do it too. Absolutely.
And where these places existed, you're one dust storm away from shit just getting covered like you never believe. And we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of years of that happening. And the abandonment of Babylon, I think, like we were talking about, did happen because after Alexander died there was so much infighting among his generals and the people below him that the people just decided to move because they got so tired of dealing with that situation. And it makes me think too, how many times would a natural disaster or a war somehow that's foreign to think about in our country, how many times did that have to happen before you're just fuck it, I'm moving? This place is great, but it's just not worth all this.
I never really sat and thought about that until you'd mentioned that the other day, and I'm thinking about it more now, is that, what, it makes perfect sense that that's what would be, regardless of the city and all of its, amenities and just the fact that it was so beautiful, that's not going to make you feel better when everyone that you love is getting killed.
Yeah, and there's a food shortage, a famine, somebody's taking over your water source.
I don't know, man. I don't think it takes long. I think you have some stubborn people that stick it out, but the whole point is they're only going to last a couple generations, because if they have children, who's to say that the children aren't going to be no, fuck this, I'm out of here. I'm not going to fucking stick around here.
If we moved to Tornado Alley, I think it would only take me one tornado to be fuck this. I'm moving to higher ground or somewhere else. I'm not going through a natural disaster like this again. And I don't blame them for wanting to get away from the war and the strife and this city just falling into disrepair and then being swallowed up by the desert, because that's just what kind of happens over there. Anywhere that's left, anywhere that's not tended to, will just eventually
That's all
be
you need. Is all
swallowed
you
up.
need the population to dwindle down enough to where they couldn't hold back and maintain the city, and at that point, then it's just going to start getting, it's going to degrade, and people
Yeah.
are just going to leave because of that.
You only have so many followers to try to run the place, and if you don't have somebody to run the cisterns or anything to pull water off of the river and to boil it, and I don't even know if they did that back then, but to make it potable and drinkable, it's just not really worth it anymore. It went from a huge population that was a thriving city to just nothing because the people didn't believe in it anymore.
This is the type of thing that I think kind of leads or lends credence to like the theories that there were more advanced civilizations. I'm not saying more advanced than we are now, but that there were advanced civilizations prior to like written history or history as we know it. And so like in this scenario, if they probably had an idea of where Babylon was, there's probably still some markers and everything like that, but if this is the invention or kind of the start of written history with Babylon, how many civilizations? Because that's probably why Babylon was still known about, because they created the ability to keep record of their own city, so people would know where it was at or be able to find it. Civilizations that were before this, maybe that didn't have that ability, but were still maybe more advanced in their own ways, could have just been wiped out, or what am I trying to say? Natural disaster happens or something, and the nature just takes them back. It like, how long would it have to be? I'm gonna get all like tinfoil hat. How long would it have to be before like nature took back like a modern city? It would take a long time because like we're using more durable materials now, but
Well, we see it today so much in an unfortunate circumstance that happened, but Chernobyl has been kind of a city that was abandoned and then taken back by nature. Granted, it is nuclear nature now, but the abandonment of the cities where you
fucking
see
trees with fingers and fucking wolves with two heads. And,
you see animals that their eyes glow because of the nuclear nature of it, but nature is still taken over. It's covering the buildings now.
and that's only how many years?
Yeah, and that's a lush environment. When you think about a desert somewhere over there where you had to be next to a river, because if you weren't, you'd just die. There was no other
Well, I think
natural
they have
resources.
said because of also being next to the river, that the river itself changes and deposits like minerals and differently. A bunch of the city is underwater, just because the river is diverted throughout that time. So I'm just saying, like, yeah, like how much do you have to keep? Like, if you really think about it, like you have to keep nature at bay if you're in a city to keep that thing up and going.
And not to mention the way of the world still happens. Like there was still, before people really started to affect the environment.
Infect is probably
Infect does work too. There was still drought. There was still famine. There was still years where water wasn't great coming from the mountains that fed these rivers that fed down into the ocean. So you run into 2 or 3 years of that where you don't have enough water to sustain yourself and your plants and your food. Those civilizations could have been wiped out before they really got a chance to get going. So I would say anywhere where we probably have like maybe potentially mysterious old groupings of people could absolutely have happened, but it probably would have happened in a desert where it could be covered up immediately, or you would run into a drought or something like that.
Or on the coast and it's been reclaimed by the ocean, or something like that.
We even think about how much of the rainforest that we've gone through and looked at, there's still parts of the rainforest, there's still tribes out there that have lived for hundreds of years that we have no documentation on and don't understand, because either they're too hostile to get to or they're too hard to get to. It just really depends on the viability that they have in those areas. And there could have been people way before the Incans that lived in the Amazon rainforest that we don't know about because, we just haven't gotten there yet. Which I like. I like that there's that mystery in the world, that there's still stuff that we haven't explored and discovered.
We don't know everything. Yeah, I like thinking about that too.
So like we've been talking about, it's a wonder of the world for a reason. I think it would be very cool to still do in this day and age, to go around and try to visit all these different places. Mm-hmm. I'd probably just go ahead and skip this one until we can get some more safety in the region, because the amount of bombs that go off and the amount of things that happen. And that's kind of the interesting thing about it, is I was just thinking as we were talking about it, in the 40 or so years that it has been contentious, or since the divide and split between the world wars, where those areas were kind of chopped up to the victors, that wasn't the only time that there was fighting in this region. This region's been up for grabs to the strongest bidder, basically,
you can
since
see
the
it in
beginning of time.
before Babylon became Babylon, or right in its early beginnings, where it was taken over by, between like the Assyrians and the Persians, and then Alexander coming in. Yeah, I mean, it's in an area where it just seemed to be getting passed back and forth.
So it wasn't like modern day wars cut up this area. It's just been constantly up for grabs.
That's one thing too, is you think about like like civilizations like England. They're on an island, so they already have a built-in their success rate just by being on that island. When they start to develop and start to grow as a civilization, they have so much higher of a likelihood to survive because they're just the natural defenses.
Yeah, they have high ground.
Someplace like this that's in the middle of it's in the Middle East, when there's all of these different civilizations around it, and this place looks very appealing. It's at a water source. It's got these, it's a fantastical city. It's huge. It was the largest city. That's going to be something that people are going to fight over.
Yeah, there's already an ecosystem of living there that can be sustained for more people. And it's still, to this day, like seeing just the layouts of the cities and everywhere around it, there's nowhere really, there's no natural protections. There's a reason that Nebuchadnezzar built those walls. It was because that was the safety that they had from being invaded. Whereas before that happened, you were only like one or two sand dunes away from an army of people coming and taking over your land.
All right, man. You got anything else?
No, I really like this one. It's the amount of topics that we cover, I feel like, is fun because it goes into so many different aspects and different parts of life. And our history is just so long and so rich everywhere in the world that we could go to a different time in a different place on a different continent every single week, and there's still so much to learn. History is never ending for knowledge to find out and learn. Really, I mean, the most important thing that this would be is if you were a historian, or if you got put on the show with Trebek, Jeopardy. Like, these are great Jeopardy topics, but they're still very important because you learn about history, you learn about cuneiform, you learn about written language, you learn that the things in the Bible are in the Bible for a reason, but at the same time, they're in the Bible as more of a fantastic way to describe something that happened in history. I feel like Babylon
got kind of vilified in the Bible. I think there had to probably be scapegoats, and Babylon maybe just pissed someone off. Whoever wrote about Babylon, because it's not like, again, it's all accounts. So whoever wrote about Babylon, maybe they just didn't have a good time in Babylon.
Yeah,
maybe
they had an axe to grind.
Maybe like the prostitute in Babylon wanted to charge them extra, and they didn't have enough, and so he walked away and be like, I'll fucking show this town.
Yeah, you only got enough for a goat in Babylon instead of an actual woman. So
yeah, exactly.
You're having a bad time.
I'm going to write this in my fucking journal, and lo and behold, and then Matthew said it was so.
The Bible was just a burn book at that point. Like, anybody that burned him, they just wrote terrible things about him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, could have been. Yeah, I was going to say. All right, guys. Thanks for sticking with us, joining us again this week. And, listen for the socials, and let us know what you think.
All right. Peace.
All right, guys. Hey, thank you so much for making it through another episode and sticking with us. If you want to kind of follow up on the next upcoming episodes, get some teasers, Adam, can they get us on the Twitter?
They can get us on the Twitter. Our Twitter handle is Historically High. That's Historically HI.
Nice. And on the Instagram?
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod. That's Historically High POD.
And what happens if your social media inept?
If you have any issues where you can't figure out social media, our email is historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com.
We set up a landline.
Just in case.
You guys can go ahead and shoot us any question, comments, or even maybe suggestions for future episodes, something you guys want to hear.
Yeah, high thoughts, questions, anything like that. We're always open. We'll always get back to you.
Hell yeah, guys. See you on the next episode.
Peace.